I know you're anxious about getting started on your new tile project, and every project deserves a perfect installation. But that only happens with planning. Planning with your tile on site is a perfect way to make sure you've got a chance at perfection. You've done the hard part. You've decided if your ceramic tile matches your cabinets or your favorite sweater. Now you need to lay out your project. Now you need to take those measurements, decide on the grout joint, because nothing is worse than having a poor layout and poor choices, and you'll have to look at it a lot longer than you're gonna have to look at your ugly sweater. I tend to dive into a project head first, and while that's a way to get the project going, it often doesn't offer the best results. Planning is key. This video is about planning. It's about doing a dry layout and where to start. If you don't know me, my name is Craig, and I was a contractor for over 20 years. And I used to take a lot of time in pre-planning layout for large commercial jobs. But that doesn't only work when you have a set of plans and everything in front of you before a job starts. That can help with a simple bathroom renovation or a backsplash. So let's give you some tips and tricks on how to do a dry layout and plan your installation. The first thing you're gonna wanna do is what area you are working in, find the center of that area. And that was gonna be from top to bottom, left to right. You wanna come up with a cross that says this is the center point of the room or the backsplash. This gives you an area to start working. The next step that I do is I wanna lay out my tile. Whatever tile it is, if it's a floor tile or a wall tile, I wanna lay it out with the actual spacing that I'm gonna use. This is a good time to gather everyone together and make sure that you've chosen the right grout joint size. You're gonna take your spacers and you're gonna set out a section of tile on the flat surface, preferably in the area you're gonna work. If it's on the floor, you've already got the floor prepped and you're ready to go, start laying it out there. If it's on a wall, it's gonna be a little more difficult to maybe find a countertop or something flat that you can use as reference. Now that you've got your tile laid out with the spacer that you've proposed to use, let everybody look at it. This is the time you can decide, is your substrate flat enough to make those grout joints smaller? Do you feel comfortable enough shrinking them down, maybe from 1/8 of an inch to 1/16? Or is your tile maybe a handmade tile and it's not quite square and you want to increase that grout joint to make it look better? This is when you make that decision. Remember, once you mix up your mortar and your thin set, you're on the clock. Time is ticking. But now you can take your time, maybe send some photographs to the designer, to the homeowner. If you're the homeowner, get your spouse in or your kids, maybe the dog, take a look at it and decide, okay, the spacing is right. Once this is grouted, it's gonna look amazing. While popping lines on your wall and your floor is critical, also hitting that like and subscribe button. I know you're getting great information here. Let us know you appreciate it. Now that your grout joint is decided, you know what measurements you're gonna get. You can look at the lines that you've popped on the wall or the floor where your center lines are, and now you can start kind of trying to decide where your cuts are gonna be. One of the rules of thumb for the tile industry is that you don't want any cuts that are less than half a tile. So if you have a 12 by 12 tile, you really don't want to cut smaller than 6 inches. But sometimes they're inevitable. Depending on your room or your walls, you have to make decisions based on what you're gonna see and the most dominant eye lines when you walk into that room. For instance, I always told my team, the cut behind the toilet is probably the least offensive cut there is. You don't ever see it, it's behind the toilet. But the cut opposite from the toilet, that's a big deal because you stare at it. Going back to your center line and that center point, you can start taking some measurements with your actual tiles that are actually laid out with the actual grout spacing and you can determine where your cuts are gonna be. I know if I lay it out here, full tile at the counter, what am I gonna get at the top? If it's an ugly cut, I can shift the entire installation down for a big cut on the bottom and a big cut on the top. Once these decisions are made for your big areas, look then at penetrations, whether it's an outlet. Do I need to adjust for that? And if you do adjust for that, does that mess something else up? Pop lines, make notes on your wall or on your substrate so that you know when you start your tile, you know where all your cuts are, and everybody is kind of shaking hands and agreeing on that. I've known actually some tile setters, when they're in a small room, they'll pre-cut the entire room before they mix up their mortar. That way they know for sure everything's cut. They can take a step backwards, look at it and say, yeah, that's exactly what I want. This takes time. And while time is money, it's a whole lot better to figure out what's going on before you are pigeonholed into an installation you do not like. We've talked about a square installation, but what if your installation has a pattern? That needs to come into play also. If it's a simple offset joint pattern, a brick, or a 33rd% offset, depending on the size of your tile, that's gonna make a difference on your cuts. You wanna do that math also. But what if you've got a more intense pattern like a herringbone? You wanna lay that out and make those decisions also. You wanna make sure that your entry areas and your big sight lines have the best cuts. Maybe then you make the decision, I'm gonna have good cuts on here, and we call it run wild on the rest of the room because maybe there's furniture or it's not seen very much. So patterns add a level of difficulty that you are gonna wanna tackle and think about before you get started. If you've hired a contractor, go through these steps with them, ask them those questions. What cuts am I gonna have here and what cuts am I gonna have here? They'll appreciate the conversation because the last thing a setter wants to do is walk away from a project and has made an on-the-job decision that's different than the homeowner. One warning I'll give you, while construction is a great industry, not everything is square and plumb. So if you're making the assumption that if you run off one wall, it's gonna be parallel to the wall opposite 10 feet away, that's a bad assumption. If you've got a small tile, unfortunately I've seen many installations where you start with a full tile and by the time it gets to the end of the wall, it's less than a tile or even that tile completely disappears. That is another reason it's critical to use those center lines because that'll help you see that. When you measure one side of the room to the other, and it's off, you know that you've got some walls that are maybe not parallel. That was a lot of information. Quick review. Lay out your project before. Take measurements. Decide on the grout joint that you want to have. Lay out your cuts. Know where every cut's gonna be and how big they are. The rule of thumb is greater than half a tile. Do these things, your installation's gonna be amazing. I look forward to seeing them. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Now you have your layout ready, you are ready to set tile. I need you to check out this video right here because it gives you your next step. And don't forget, let's keep learning together, tile the world.